Sitting on the awards committee that I found a shock when I first started doing it is exactly how humbling it is. Our colleagues are amazing, and I think in a world where self-aggrandizement is sometimes the norm, what's shocking about some of these nominations is that you just don't know these people at all. And then when you read their record, you look at their CV, you're just going, I want to be more like them. And our next award winner is a perfect example of that. I think it's great anytime an old white guy wants to be like a young female scientist and there's not endocrine disruptors involved. It's a good thing. So the Yentsch-Schindler Award, as we've just heard, is designed for honoring scientists who can do it all, the three-part thing. They're educators, they are doing fundamentally important science, and their science is taken to the masses. They walk it like they talk it. And I think Emily Bernhardt, the winner of the 2013 Yentsch-Schindler Award, is our inaugural winner, and she's a perfect example of this. Her research on stream water restoration has been fundamental in understanding both changes in biogeochemical cycling and the degree to which the environment's been disrupted. And there were a couple of things in the bulletin about the stats associated with this. What immediately struck me was her works illustrated that that mines in West Virginia cover 5% of the land area, and I started thinking this is actually more than all the standing water in the region that I work in Central North America, and that was just the tip of the iceberg. She's been really active in taking this message, though, to the people who are going to make decisions. And what I've learned myself is that decision makers make decisions irrespective of what we do. So we can either complain about not doing things and having no effect, or we can roll up our sleeves and get in there. And I think Emily's a perfect example of how you can take your science and make it manageable, make it understandable, and make it important for a legislative process. As a graduate educator, she has now more PhDs and postdocs than I've trained in my entire career. This is a remarkable achievement while doing all this other things. And then, of course, there's the whole personal aspect. People actually have lives, they have families, and to do it all, I think, just illustrates how terrific some of the newer members of our society are. So the thing that I liked about this, just in total, were the adjectives. This is a wonderful nomination. No finer example can be selected. And so with that, I'd like you to help me welcome Emily Bernhardt, the inaugural winner of the Yentsch-Schindler Award.
And also Dave Schindler and Clarice Yentsch.
Thank you very much. Wow, and after that I have to give a talk. This is a great honor. I really want to thank the awards committee for choosing me and my nominators who did this without my knowledge at all. Actually, I want to see, can you hear me if I'm here? Okay, I'd love to stand out here if I could. John Downing called me last fall and told me about this. It came out of the blue, and you probably don't know this, but I was returning your call from a gas station where I had just gotten a flat tire with my car. And it was the day I had just gotten a rejection from NSF on a grant proposal. It really made my day. So thank you so much. It was a much better weekend. So I asked my graduate students when I found out about this award and the talk that I was expected to give, what would you like to hear me say? And so this talk is really oriented around their suggestions for what they would like to hear about this issue of finding balance in the career. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the science I'm doing, but I'm mainly going to focus this on thinking about how we engage outside of the traditional academic science discourse. So some lessons I'm learning, these many of my senior colleagues already know this, so this is really a work in progress for me. And when I say finding balance, I think when you see a woman standing on a stage talking about balance, you assume that this is what I'm going to talk about. It's not for today. I struggle a lot with the issues of family and work balance, but we all do. This is not a women's issue. It's an issue of people that want to be part of a family. Today I want to talk about balance in a professional career. And this whole, single scale, I don't think is a very accurate depiction for what we're actually doing as scientists. This is more like it. Standing on a ball, juggling many, many different things all the time. We have so many different roles to play. And sometimes when you're told you need to get out there and you need to get engaged in public debate, you just think, God, not one more thing. How am I going to manage it? And so I really like this award for recognizing that challenge and the way that various people may go about answering it. And the two people for whom this award is named have both found elegant ways to do this juggling act and to make it look easy throughout their careers. I'm sure it was not, but they've made it look so. And so I'm glad that Roxanne already talked about each of them so that I can dive straight into my talk, which is what did I do when I was offered the opportunity to, as they say, practice what you preach and actually get engaged as a scientist in legal debates. So here I am. It's about 5 years ago. I haven't got tenure yet. I have a big lab. I have several federal grants. I have a baby. I have a 5-year-old. And I get a call asking me to come be an expert witness in a case about mountaintop mining. The issues in that case were directly relevant to the research that I had been doing for nearly 10 years at that time. It seemed very intriguing, and it also seemed like it was going to take an enormous amount of time and be a pretty big risk professionally. And why did I choose to do it? Well, in reality, I chose to do it because I got angry. I got angry that this was the questions that people wanted me to address. The first was a claim. So this, I should back up and say that this federal district court case was a consortium of environmental groups who were suing the Army Corps of Engineers and a mining company where the permit had been granted, and this lawsuit was saying that the permit was granted under arbitrary and capricious decision-making, and they wanted to call into question 2 claims of the permit. The first was the claim that a new mountaintop mine would have no water quality impact off-site. And in this room, I probably don't need to tell you that is not likely to be the case. Very mild changes to watershed leads to water quality impact. But the idea that one could actually wholesale dynamite off the tops of mountains and put that waste rock into river valleys, burying streams and tens to hundreds of meters of rock, would have no water quality impact, does not pass the sniff test. And so this is a fairly straightforward argument to take down in testimony. The only challenge is making that be a calm argument. The second claim that they wanted me to speak on, sorry, going the wrong way, is that functional streams can be created. So one of the other major issues in mountaintop mining is that no one contests that burying a stream underneath tens to hundreds of meters of rock is an ultimate destructive practice. At issue is whether that's okay as long as you build a stream somewhere else. So in my work in stream restoration, we've done a lot of evaluation finding that stream restoration is very rarely effective at reestablishing function. The idea that you not only go in and improve a stream, but actually build a stream de novo, usually on top of an old reclaimed mine, was an interesting issue. And then the idea that you would then assess your success at doing that with equations like this. This is a functional condition index. This is my entire career of biogeochemical function in streams condensed into an equation that suggests that the biogeochemistry of a stream is a function of sediment embeddedness, the number of pieces of large woody debris, the amount of detritus in the riparian zone, the dBH of trees that you plant, and the proportion of forest in the watershed. I would argue that that is an oversimplification, and indeed that's what I did in the courtroom. And so what I learned in the courtroom arguing about these 2 claims was that we have an important role to play as just basic educators, going in and speaking to a federal district court judge about why these are oversimplifications and why, based on basic principles out of a textbook, one should not expect these claims to in fact be true. We have a role to play, and really anyone in this room could play that same role of sitting in a room and explaining to someone how a simplification is an oversimplification. The other thing that I encountered in that first court case, sorry, I should say, was that I was asked to also comment on this question, which is what proportion of a watershed can be mined without damage? The lawyers that I was working with, wonderful people, wanted me to say 10%. I don't know why. I think they had decided that was a politically palatable number, but there wasn't any data on which to base such an assessment. And so I refused to make a statement on that topic, despite a great deal of pressure. This is the other side of getting engaged, is that you have to be careful. Any group that you're working with is going to want you to overstate your knowledge. And so one important lesson that I learned early in this process is that it's very important to draw a line in the sand that you will not cross, and that you stay very much connected to the data so that you're speaking from a position of strength. But it bothered me that I couldn't answer this very basic question, that we could have a land use change that is actually is the dominant form of land use change in Appalachia, for which we couldn't make this most basic kind of answer. And so that actually ended up motivating a huge amount of research in my lab group and with a number of collaborators over the last 4 or 5 years to actually go out and find out. It's not that hard to do. This is now showing you a time series of photographs for the Mud River Watershed in southern West Virginia. This is the largest surface mine in Appalachia. It's now about 45 square kilometers. And you're just watching it grow across the landscape over time here. That giant mine that just started here is the largest single valley fill permit ever granted. An entire third order stream was filled. Here, this Connolly branch. And so this mine represented a nice opportunity to look at these cumulative impacts, because the Mud River runs for several kilometers before it enters the Hobeck complex and then flows through. A family has maintained property in the center of that mine because they won it, kept it from being taken away by eminent domain. They won it in a Supreme Court case. And they're very excited about having scientists come onto their land and take samples, which is often not true in the mountaintop mine landscape. So we were able to go into this landscape and do a very simple series of synoptic surveys and show that, in fact, as you might expect, the proportion of the watershed that was mined as you moved from upstream unmined areas through this watershed, accumulating new tributaries that were draining old and new surface mines, you could explain 90% of the variation in conductivity, calcium, magnesium, uranium, selenium, just by knowing how much of that watershed was mined. So pretty clear demonstration of cumulative impacts. And then we wanted to show that that wasn't simply a case here in this one place, but also across the entire river network. So here, this is the Hobeck mine, but it's just one of many, many, many mines in this landscape. So as Peter said earlier, more than 5% of the land surface area in southern West Virginia has been converted to surface mines. For comparison, development occupies only about 3% of the land area. So this is a very large-scale disturbance. And through a variety of data synthesis efforts, we were able to show that disturbance of 5% of the land area could be associated with a loss of intolerant taxa in 20 to 40% of the river network, suggesting that this small amount of land surface area degradation is leading to off-site pollution sufficient to make nearly a third of the entire river network unlikely to pass the narrative biological criteria. This then has implications for policy, because this means that many more streams are going to be listed on the state 303D list, and the state taxpayers then become responsible for cleaning up those systems. So we now have a way of equating the footprint of a mine to the scale of degradation of water quality. Similar kind of efforts are going on to look at what this means for carbon sequestration. We're beginning to look at what this means relative to the economic benefits of coal. So these are just two examples of a number of studies that have gone on over the last 5 years as the academic community has gotten more and more engaged in this topic. I think largely as a result of Margaret Palmer's leadership, bringing it into sort of public discourse in our scientific communities and making us all much more eager to engage on this topic. And these studies are collectively having an impact. It's impossible to take credit for it, because I think as a community, we're all going after this question. We're all contributing to our knowledge of this debate. But what I can say is that we've had significant success. In the Mud River system, Patriot Coal, which owns that mine, recently settled out of court and now must pay hundreds of millions of dollars to clean up selenium in that landscape. They have to build a reverse osmosis plant on site to clean up the selenium pollution from one of their individual mines. And as a result of that, as well as natural gas pricing, Patriot Coal announced several weeks ago that they will no longer conduct surface mining. They are the second largest energy company in Appalachia, and so this is a major change. And I think in part the acknowledgement of the inevitable writing on the wall that as the environmental costs are becoming harder and harder to argue, they're going to have to pay to clean it up, and that makes the economic viability of this form of mining less and less realistic going into the future. The EPA issued a guidance on conductivity last year. It's currently under a lot of legal debate. They were sued by the state of West Virginia and the Office of Surface Mining. That court case is still in question, but if it were to go through, it would be very difficult to continue doing surface mining as it's currently practiced, since we have no examples of any individual surface mine that has gone in without exceeding that guidance standard. So I think as academic scientists got engaged in this debate, which government scientists have been working on quite well for some time but have not been able to speak out about, we begin to see some real movement in the way policymakers and courts were making decisions about this particularly interesting environmental issue. Now, of course, this is an ongoing issue. The court cases are going to continue, but at least I feel quite validated as a person engaged in this that we've actually been able to inject science into the courtroom and into policy debates, which is really my goal as a scientist as opposed to my goal as a citizen. I did want to point out here that the press release for this suggested that I'm an adversary of the surface mining industry. I'm not. I'm an advocate for the best use of science. Ultimately, the decisions that are made about things like this are going to be based on what we decide we want to do. And all I can hope to do is make sure that that decision is made with knowledge of our best possible extrapolation of what the ecological implications are going to be. So I really like this quote, and I know you've made many such quotes in the news, David, but this quote I think is a great one. The days when we can afford to sit in our ivory towers and put our bound volumes on the shelves of our libraries and then expect them to have any impact on how ecosystems are managed are long gone. People who are making decisions do not read your papers. They don't have to read your papers. And unless you put your papers on their desk in ways that require them to read them, they will not read your papers. I was struck in my postdoc on restoration. We actually interviewed 350 restoration practitioners from around the country and asked them how they decided what kinds of projects to do and what kinds of information influenced their approach. One out of 350 practitioners, professional restoration engineers, had ever actually used a scientific paper to affect what they did. So you have to go beyond just simply publishing the paper. If your work has implications for decisions that are being made and you care, you should get engaged. Now, engagement does not have to be hundreds of hours reading legal documents and expert testimony in the courtroom and the pain and agony of doing a legal deposition. It can be really simple, and one of the most powerful things that you can do is to submit comments when there's an opening for getting those comments on the public record. If I now submit my papers along with a brief note, anytime a permit on mining is being open for public comment, the regulators have to take those papers into consideration, and they can be sued if they don't. So this is one of the easiest and simplest ways that you can engage as a scientist. If your work is relevant, get it out there, get it to where policymakers have to consider it. You can also just make a point to meet with regulatory management officials. Let them know that you're interested in helping. Don't tell them what you think. Tell them what you can provide. And then if you want to go whole hog, you can begin to participate in hearings and serve as an expert witness. If more of us did that, it would be easier on those of us that have decided to take the plunge, and we would be less of an anomaly, which would help in terms of people coming up with their own ideas for what our motivations for doing this kind of work may be. I also like this quote from Nancy Barron, who will be speaking tomorrow. This is from a 2010 Nature commentary where she talks about standing up for science. She said it's important to remember that not answering what policymakers want and need to know leaves a void, one that contrarians are only too happy to fill. In my experience in the courtroom, it was very eye-opening to see that a consulting report, an unpublished master's thesis, and a paper in science are equivalent. They are treated as equivalent pieces of information unless someone is there to explain why they are not. Again, our role as an educator in evaluating science is central to actually helping regulators, policymakers, and judges make decisions when they're weighing information. If we're not in that courtroom, those differentiations are not made. And that to me is really fascinating. If you ever get a chance to sit in a courtroom and see how scientific papers are thrown around and how excerpts are taken at random from papers, from your papers, and used in the courtroom, you should take it because it's a very eye-opening experience. So it's important that we be an honest broker, that we listen, that we actually answer the questions that policymakers want to know. If you do enter into this, you need to be prepared for scrutiny and disrespect, which means you need to be really closely tied to the data, and you have to not expect recognition. Finally, I see I'm going to get the boot in a second. I just want to say, we tend to think of this axis of doing work that has immediate application and doing work that fundamentally builds understanding as being orthogonal axes, but there is indeed a sweet spot where both of those can be maximized. This is called Pasteur's Quadrant, work that both advances our understanding and is immediately applicable. I think that's the kind of work that many of our most famous limnologists and oceanographers have been engaged in, opportunities to have science that is really important and also really easy to explain and which has enormous impact. If you do this kind of work, it makes your broader impact section of your NSF grants really easy to write. It also makes it really easy to do interdisciplinary science because you're problem-based. Ego goes away, jargon goes away, you're focused on finding out answers. And I have found this to be incredibly rewarding. So it's a lot of work, but in the end, I think it's an incredibly enriching approach to take to your scientific career. And finally, I would be remiss if I didn't end by thanking my mentors, Gene Likens, Bill Schlesinger, and Margaret Palmer, all of whom lead this life of being phenomenal scientists who are also absolutely committed to making sure that the science that they produce is communicated to the broadest possible audience. And with that, I will just close by saying thank you to my lab group for helping me think about this talk, and thank you to all of you for coming this morning and listening to me. Thank you.